How many times do you go back to a dry well, even if it feels safe, before apathy or futility, as Ethan Burris would say, sets in? And you're like, it's just not worth it anymore. You still feel safe, but it's not worth it. And so I've realized that a speak up culture is more than only psychological safety. It's also, does it feel worth it? Is there a positive perception of impact?
It's time to get inside your own head. Begin with the psychology behind your behaviors. Infuse it with an acute understanding of self-awareness, emotion, storytelling, body language, and more. Then look at it all through the lens of the latest neuroscience research, broken down to its most digestible form. And you've arrived. Enhanced messaging, deeper connection, heightened influence, and a greater impact on the world. Welcome to the Amplify Podcast with René Rodriguez.
All right, welcome to this episode of the Amplify Podcast. And today I have a very special guest, somebody that was introduced to me by a recent friend that I met who's formerly of Nike. He was at an event, and she said, you have to meet Shed. And I hear that a lot, so I was going, a little skeptical, but the moment I saw his bio, and knowing who she was, I immediately knew this was somebody that I wanted to interview, get to know, and immediately have him on my podcast. And so I want to give you more of his background here. He's got a book. He used to work with and is still associated with Simon Sinek and done some really cool things, but I want to read a little bit more so you understand the context of why. So Stephen Shedletzky, most people call him Shed, at least friends now call him Shed, so you're going to know him now as Shed, helps leaders listen to and nurture the voice of others. Listen to and nurture the voice of others. This is really critical to understanding that. And sought after speaker, coach, advisor, has led hundreds of keynote presentations, workshops, and leader development programs around the world. This is what I loved. He is a thought leader on psychological safety in the workplace. You've heard me talk about psychological safety, how that pertains to the triune brain theory, all of those different pieces, but everything begins with that psychological safety. And we're going to dive deep into that idea today. He wrote a book called Speak Up Culture, and that's actually pretty recent. So please look that up. When leaders truly listen, people step up. What a great idea for all of us. So after years in the corporate track, he was introduced to Simon Sinek, and inspired by his work, soon after their meeting, Shed actually joined Simon's team. For more than a decade, he contributed to Simon Sinek, Inc., where he was chief of staff, head of brand experience, and head of training and development. And he has led global team of speakers and facilitators. This guy's done a lot. And you guys all know Simon Sinek and the choices that he has in this marketplace. And for him to choose Stephen or Shed says a lot about who he is. And so with that, I would like to welcome Shed to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for that very, very kind introduction. It's a delight to be with you.
Well, it's fun when you come highly introduced, well introduced, and then you've got fun stuff to back it up, and yet you've got a humble nature to you, which is always incredibly refreshing. And so I want to get into how you met Simon, what you did with Simon. I want to get into psychological safety, really deeply into psychological safety, because I think that deserves just the entire time in and of itself. But I would love just give us the brief on how you got to where you're at, because I know you've got some interesting pieces in your background, even, family members that survived the Holocaust, which is a whole nother narrative to live from and live under, especially in today's times. So tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you. So one of my favorite recent quotes that I've heard, though it came from many, many years ago, is from a Danish philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, who said that life makes sense looking backwards, but it must be lived forwards. It's why, the question of, René, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Well, it's not the answer that matters. It's more the thinking process, because you're not going to be there, but you'll be somewhere. But how do you view yourself? So it's more the thinking. So as I look back, there are a few sort of pivotal moments in people that really defined who I am today. One, growing up with a stutter and coming from a long line of stutterers, because it is hereditary. I married a speech therapist, a speech language pathologist. Good choice. More so for my kids and nieces and nephews, because I've done the work and I have the tools. But intimately knowing what it feels like to be voiceless, to have something to say, or to not believe you have something to say or something worth saying. Had an amazing professor in university that allowed me to experience fulfillment and use my voice and find my voice, which was amazing. Early on in my career, first day on my corporate job, 1,000 people were let go post merger. And so I was walking in as many more were leaving with boxes in hand. And so I saw the impact of leadership behavior and organizational culture, and quite frankly, lack of psychological safety and certainty, or at least control on people's productivity as well as their health and well-being. Yeah, very much leaned into my grandfather, who was a very gregarious survivor of the Holocaust and shared his story very openly. My next book is going to be about him. I'm going to write his memoir. And then right time, right place, right passion, working with Simon for so many years, and now being able to do it with my own brand and book is a ton of fun and great joy and meaning.
That's phenomenal. So tell me, how did you meet Simon? I mean, I remember the first time I saw him, and I saw his TED talk, and I remember calling my mother at the time saying, I just saw something that I'm going to devote the next 10 years of my life to learn and master. It wasn't the first time that I talked about the power of why or heard about it. I mean, I've got workshops that I did in 2002 on your big why, and it was his articulation of it that was so unique, and it was so graspable in my mind, and it made so much sense, and it gave you a visceral response when you changed the order of things. And it fit alongside what the research when he went into the biological reasons, that was my background. And I was like, okay, so we're very aligned in that area, but it was just such a cool articulation of it. And so how did you meet Simon?
So I met Simon by accident at an event in Toronto. So I was already sort of both miserable and searching in my early career. I met with someone who quickly became a mentor, who sent me Simon's TEDx talk, the How Great Leaders Inspire Action, top 5 watched of all talks on TED.com. Brilliant talk. And I successfully procrastinated for 2 months, 2 or 3 months, didn't watch it, and then clicked the email and watched the talk. I think it was August of 2010. So the talk had only been out for a year or two. And I had sort of had a similar reaction to you, René, which is everything this guy says I know to be true. I just hadn't thought about it or articulated it that way or that clearly. It was so compelling and useful. I mean, one of my favorite Simon quotes is around ideas that are simple. Simple ideas are easy to understand. Ideas that are easy to understand can be repeated. Ideas that are repeated can change the world. And he's so good at that.
He really is.
Yeah. So that was August 2010. I was fired from my job on my 1-year anniversary because I George Costanza'd. I was mentoring a number of interns, a disproportionate number of which turned down full-time job opportunities, citing conversations with me. So I was not having a great employee experience, and I was sharing that with others. Not a great thing to do. And so I was rightfully let go, even though I was a high performer. But for me, it was a perfect sort of wake-up call that this was not the path for me. And then a few months later, I went to a conference to hear Malcolm Gladwell speak. He was working on David versus Goliath. So he gave the David versus Goliath talk, even though the book hadn't been out yet. It was brilliant. And Simon was the cover boy of the conference. He was on the sort of conference magazine. I showed up a few minutes late to the conference and sat down to some friends, and they were like, look at the cover of the magazine, it's your boy. Because I was already drawing golden circles on napkins and explaining the why, how, and what to anyone who would listen. And so right time, right place, a dear friend, Ron Tite, was emceeing that event. And I had a chance to ask Simon a question in front of 1,500 people on authenticity, bumped into him in the hall at the event after, and then started an email relationship with him and his team, read his book, and just ate up anything that I could because I was just so fascinated by his vision of a more inspired, safe, and fulfilled world. So yeah, it was a chance run-in at an event.
I love that. And as much as I want to hear more about that, I want to get into what I think is the topic that we can really dive deep into, which is psychological safety. And I want to preface it a little bit here. In the 30 years that I've been doing this, the core idea that we have focused on is psychological safety. Now, 30 years ago, when you talk about, are we going to make people feel safe? They'd look at you like you were crazy. It was just do the work was the idea. The promise of employment back then was longevity. I will employ you for life if you do what we need you to do. That's not the promise anymore. Now it's, if I don't like it here, I'll leave. Everything has changed so much. But when we get into psychological safety in the workplace is one thing. Psychological safety in relationships, same thing. Psychological safety when selling a product. I mean, all of this is a neuroscience, biologically backed idea that when you don't feel safe, meaning structure, order, predictability, all those things, the parts of your brain that are open to new ideas shut down. And so when you can start thinking, and the most astute leaders are the ones that understand there's a sequence to all of this. And even in my book, my chapter 2 or 3 is sequences everything. That all refers to creating safety first. And you have to, because no innovation comes in an unsafe environment. And to backdrop this, when we're talking about safety, we're not talking about, in essence, physical safety. We're talking about the biological response to the threat of high levels of stress, which is the only way the brain measures any physical threat is how much cortisol is this secreting. And if it's high enough, it means death. And so, unfortunately, illogical things can create the same cortisol response in the brain, like public speaking, and you think you're going to die. So you'll respond in that fight, flight, freeze response, and you don't feel psychologically safe. And so it's not physical safety. It's this emotional piece where I can speak up without fear of repercussion. I'm just giving that as a backdrop so those of you listening know where we're headed. But Stephen is an expert in this arena. And so I love hearing different angles and applications and things like that. And so let's just start anywhere, go everywhere with this idea. And what is the most important thing for an audience to understand? Let's start at the ground level and go, what is psychological safety? How do I see it? How do I understand it? Why is it important? Start anywhere, go everywhere.
Great. So, and I do want to say physical safety is still important. We must provide physical safety in our places of work and beyond.
I was only referring, we don't have bears and tigers typically in the workplace. Yeah.
Right.
But yes,
Yeah, not typically, but some folks do. Yeah. If you work at the zoo or in the jungle. So I fully admit, René, that when I wrote this book, I thought I was rebranding psychological safety. I'm a fan of the body of work, hugely. Been around since 1960, but very much popularized by a scholar, Amy Edmondson, who's wonderful. And if you've not yet met Amy or consumed her work, she is the definition of grace walking. She's wonderful and the real deal and legit. And her work is all around team psychological safety, failure. She just came out with a book called Right Kind of Wrong. And while I love the body of work and first came across it as a footnote in Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, he has a little footnote that cites Edmondson's hospital study of emergency rooms where there is psychological safety and trust, and those in the hospital setting where there aren't, and that there were more medical errors reported in environments where there is psychological safety, but the key word is reported, not more medical errors occurring, more medical errors reported. There were actually more medical errors occurring in hospital environments where there wasn't psychological safety, but healthcare professionals were spending inordinate amounts of time and energy hiding those mistakes from each other for fear of getting in trouble. So a few things. So Edmondson would define psychological safety as an environment in which members of a team feel that it is safe to take interpersonal risk. One myth to bust around psychological safety is it does not mean the absence of fear. I made a 2x2 matrix in the book that it's safety and impact, that we have a speak up culture when it feels, yes, psychologically safe, and also that it feels that there's a perception, a positive perception of impact. Because let's say you and I go back 20 years and we're best of friends, and there's something that you see that I'm doing that's getting in my own way, my own success, and you care for me and you love me, and you're like, Shed, I got to have a hard conversation. You're doing this thing that's getting in the way of your success. And I'm like, René, thank you so much. You felt safe to have that conversation. I hope you felt that it was worth it, but I don't do anything. And then you have the same conversation with me 3 weeks later, and I don't do anything. And then 3 months later, and I don't do anything, right? How many times do you go back to a dry well, even if it feels safe, before apathy or futility, as Ethan Burris would say, sets in? And you're like, it's just not worth it anymore. You still feel safe, but it's not worth it. And so I've realized that a speak up culture is more than only psychological safety. It's also, does it feel worth it? Is there a positive perception of impact?
I think that's a big differentiator there, that because we're talking about and this is, and I love this because a lot of times people will create safety, but for what purpose? And business always has to be a for what purpose. And whether we like it or not, there is a P&L involved. There's a profit and loss, and people first. All those are great ideas, and I've been promoting them as long as we're profitable. Because if we're not profitable, there is no business. So I've got to run a profitable business in an ethical way, and it is possible to run a profitable business in a way that people feel safe. And so there's that piece. Like it's it's doing both of those pieces. But I love this, being able to say, what is the impact of my speaking up? Like I always use the example of, if I were to take a remote control and it didn't work for the TV, I might try it a few times, bang it on my hand a couple times, check the battery, change the battery, do anything. After about 20 minutes trying to fix it, if it just doesn't work, I set it down. So there was no impact. I feel safe enough to grab that remote, but there's no impact. I have better uses of my time in that. And I love your answering that question, that you got to go beyond just making people feel safe. Let's drive it to, what's the value to the business, to the people, to the culture, to the tangibles and intangibles of all of those pieces. So I love that you differentiated that.
And a couple of things to add on there. So one is, having a profitable business does not mean the business needs to be profitable every month, by the way. You're allowed to make investment. Like, the purpose of business is not up and to the right all the time. Like, the only thing that grows for growth's sake is cancer. There's got to be more, right? So you're allowed to make calculated risk investment sacrifice in the short term to be profitable. But yes, in the end, an organization does need to be profitable. Profit is the fuel, not the end.
And I just wrote this down. Well, it's okay to profitable, yes, but sometimes it's okay to deliberately choose to not be profitable in exchange for an investment that will make impact. Like, there's another, like, following your pattern here, right? Will this investment make an impact? So don't be stupid about it. Be strategic about this, and you're investing in the people. And I think that by committing to being profitable and being smart about money, you're also loving your people, because I'm ensuring that we're going to be around. And that's the conversation I think needs to happen with people. It's saying, I'm not doing this because I like to manage you. And when we're talking about managing salespeople, the way to create safety with them, we did this with them, is to say, let's forget the numbers and the goals. What do you want to do at the end of this year? What do you want to say we did? What kind of vacations do you want to take? Do you want to invest money? Are you looking at giving back to the community? Are you trying to feed a family? Are you trying to do a Disney cruise? Are you trying to, do the addition to your house? Okay, so now we have all of these whys, of these sort of motivators, these outcomes, things that you want to do. Then when I go, now here's the thing, here's why, now that I know what you're trying to do, you want to feed, build this church in Guatemala. Wonderful. Now for us to do that, here's the plan then, because you got to make X amount after taxes and this. So now we're going to have one or two conversations at the end of the year. One where we high five, you hit your goals, you're building the home and the church in Guatemala, and you're doing the vacations and you save the money. Or conversation number two, you didn't hit your goals. And I'm going to tell you right now, so-and-so, whoever I'm talking to, I don't want to have conversation number two, because I don't want to look at you, because I'll fail you as a leader, as a manager. So can we agree that when I hold you accountable, it's because I want you to achieve everything on this sheet of paper you just showed me. And so when we have to double our work, do more things, make some difficult choices, it's because I want to keep you on track. So we have conversation number one. And so now there's this vision, but it also created some structure and order and predictability around the difficult accountability conversation, which at times can create the lack of safety. And so we use the 3Ps model, which is predict, preempt, prevent. If I can predict any moment that will create people to feel resistant or not safe, what can I do to preempt that in order to prevent it? So that moment to think ahead, what about what I'm going to do in my message and my communication could create the lack of safety or make people feel defensive? Well, how can I preempt that? All right, now we've prevented it. Okay, let's keep going. So I love that you're applying it in that way as well.
Well, so which is why it's called a performance review, not a performance surprise. So if by the time we get to a review conversation and there's new information, either from employee or manager, direct supervisor, there's been a failure there. That I love that. What would success be by the end of this year? But if at any point we feel that we're going to over or underachieve or whatever it might be, we need to have a conversation, And like, as an example, let's say you and I had that conversation at, fiscal year end 2019, and we get clear on what our goals are by the end of 2020, and then COVID happens. Like, the world and our human experience is dynamic. And so to pretend that plans that we make 12 months prior, everything's going to be intact. And no, like, what was it? The Apollo 13 or whatever, I think it was Apollo 13, was only on track for like 3% of its mission. So it's about all of those nuances to get us back on track, which requires consistent conversation. The other thing that came to mind from what you're saying, René, around what motivates folks, whether it's building that church in Guatemala, whatever it might be. I love the work from Neil Doshi and Lindsay McGregor. They wrote the book Prime to Perform. Brilliant work on intrinsic motivation. And for someone who's spent 15 years working with Mr. Purpose and Simon Sinek, there's actually a motivator that's more powerful than purpose, and it's play. The most powerful 3 motivators are play, purpose, and then potential. Play is that flow inducing, high skill, high challenge work. The stuff that we do, whether active leisure or active work, where time stands still. For you, it might be coaching a client or being on stage. For someone else, it's yoga or riding a motorcycle. But that thing, that activity you can lose yourself in, that's the most powerful motivator. And so I think a great conversation with folks is, hey, what's play to you? And how can we make that a significant part of your job?
That's a different definition of play.
How would you, what's the definition you work with?
No, but like, I love it, because play would be like, I'm going to go play baseball with my friends and go outside and have some beers. And this is a more vocational level of play.
But there are things in our work that induce flow. That's play. That's play.
That it feels effortless.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels effortless. You're tapped into your genius. It feels effortless, but it takes focus in your full consumption. It's flow theory from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which is high skill, high challenge.
High skill. That was the 2 words I wanted to see. High skill, high challenge.
I'm both good at it. I'm good at it, but I got to use all of me to stay good at it. I can't slip up.
Oh, I love that. So that's even more than purpose. That's really cool. Why do you think that's more than purpose? Is it because it has more of an immediate?
It's directly correlated to the activity. So purpose in its inherent form is once removed. I do this so that this happens. Yeah, it's the same way that the way that Simon would construct a why or purpose statement is comprised of contribution and impact. Contribution is our top strength. I would say that our contribution and our values, our hows, that's the play stuff. The impact is the purpose. So I do my work so that I contribute toward a more fulfilled world, so that in 10 to 15 years, when my kids get their first job, they work with a leader, not for a driver. They feel part of a psychologically safe workplace, not a psychologically dangerous one.
I love that. And so the direct correlation to the activity. So there's an immediate gratification involved in it, but it also, there's a self-actualizing component. It seems like, where it's where my highest skill is. Let me see, and I'm really good at this, so I feel good, but I'm also going to be challenged. So I want to see what I'm capable within this place that I'm best at. So it sounds like, I mean, if you could align what people define as play and their work at the same time in the business strategy, you get ridiculously engaged people.
That's a good Venn diagram right there.
Yeah. I love Venn diagrams.
Yeah. It's when passion, purpose, and opportunity, that I think it's those 3 meet in the Venn diagram. It
was funny. I had a video on where I drew a Venn diagram, and on one side was discipline, and the other side was surrender, and in the middle was flow. And so where discipline and surrender meet. But if you haven't had the discipline to master something, it is very difficult to surrender. But if you have the discipline, but you can't surrender, you can't flow. So there's a lot of different ways to talk about some of these ideas, but I love the other one that you just drew too. And I think that if you're listening to this, I want you to think and notice how we're approaching similar ideas from different angles. That is where the true unpacking comes from, where you have to be okay with hearing different definitions of things that you thought you understood. Like, here I'm 30 years into psychological safety, but I'm loving what Shed is talking about here. This is giving me new ways of looking, refreshing my look, and giving me new books and new people to start reading about. I want you to take that same curious approach to the things that you think you understand in your business, whatever your business is. So what if there's a new way of looking at it, a new angle? Like, the way we construct reality is so limiting. We need to look at things from other lenses. And so, okay, so we got play, purpose, and potential. So now I kind of want to go down a different route, because I think, the golden circle, Simon's why, how, what, is also misused often. People confuse what whys are. They confuse with what the hows and the whats. And I even did something controversial. I say, sometimes I think your how is more important than your why. And they're like, what? You're going against Simon? I'm like, no. I said, think about it. I go, what if you met somebody who had an amazing why, but was an asshole the whole time? Are you going to remember their why or how they treated you? Because your how is built in your legacy. It's not in what you wanted to achieve or what drove you. But I know a lot of people with great whys, but they're just so difficult. And unfortunately, you're only alive in your how. So the way that you treat people, the way you approach things is what people will remember about you. They're not going to say, "Oh, he was an asshole, but his why was pretty big." It may be a Steve Jobs,
That's exactly who I was thinking of.
It might be one of those, but
or a living Elon Musk as well.
Yes, exactly.
But I think you make a really good distinction, which is being a visionary is different than being a leader.
Yeah.
We clump in visionary leader. It's like, no. Visionary. Like Steve Jobs, visionary. But I wouldn't necessarily say a leader, because he didn't behave as a leader does. And you don't need to be visionary to be a leader. There are other attributes of leadership, of which visionary could be helpful, but it's not a requisite. If you're a leader, you need to follow someone or some sort of vision, but you don't need to be visionary. And just because you're a visionary doesn't make you a leader.
That is a powerful distinction right there, because usually we stay with leader and manager. Now we're adding a third, visionary, leader, and manager, and they're not the same. Woo, man, this is a good one. I like this. This is good. Yeah.
And leadership is in our behavior. So you can have someone who has a title of leadership but does not behave as one. You can have a manager who absolutely behaves as a leader, and we follow them for all the right reasons.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to me, the reason I chose influence as as the 5 years ago as the focus is because, I was doing change management. We're doing leadership development, strategic planning, sales training, public speaking. And to me, all of it centered around influence, which was, to me, the only measure of leadership is influence. There's the getting people to pay attention to an idea and then getting them to act on it. You can have a great presentation, but if, I think it was the difference, Jim Rohn said it great. It was when he was talking about Demosthenes versus Cicero. And it was said of Cicero, he's one of the greatest orators of all time. And after he spoke, it was said that people would say, wow, that was the greatest presentation I've ever heard, the greatest speech I've ever heard. But when Demosthenes spoke, it was said that after he spoke, people said, let us march. And there was this, I need to move now. Inspire the heart, but you also have to move the feet. And so there's both of those pieces that kind of come together, where I think there's just a lot of value in looking at visionary attributes, leadership attributes, and manager attributes. And what's fun, I like you said that a manager can be the leader. And sometimes, because we do a lot of work with union managers, and I go, who are your cultural leaders? What do you mean? I go, the one that has no title, but if they decide to go in that direction, everyone's going. And they go, oh, it's this person. They're usually also the most contrary. I say, great. Do not let them know I'm not here to fix them, because they are leaders. We're here to inspire and to probably give them more. Like my mother, when she left the convent, she was a nun. She worked in fighting gangs in Miami, Florida. And the first thing she did was she made all the gang leaders the heads of security for prom and all the other big events. And you're going to make the gang leader that? Yeah, nobody messed with them. And they had a sense of empowerment. And now they took their leadership to a totally different place, and they kept that place safe. I mean, it's genius. And so I love that, where you're going with that. So let's talk about the golden circle, why, how, what. I'll do if you haven't read Simon Sinek's book, it's great. And I want to also get and transition this to yours, but I think that, you dealt with him. A lot of people have misunderstood that process. And a lot of people have struggled to really implement it. It mirrors somewhat the frame message tie down process that we go through in framing an idea. And there's always a sequence, because it still follows inherently the same process in the brain. The why is also the frame of reference of where we're coming from, which constructs the meaning of the message, which is the how we do things for this outcome, which we call the tie down. But a lot of people confuse whys in terms of what that really is. And so and first, have you seen people sort of bastardize the process, and then once they realize, no, here's a slight adjustment, they go, oh, that's what that means?
Yeah.
What's been your experience?
Well, so a couple of things. So one is oftentimes folks will try to bring their what into their why, but you're bigger than that. So like a good example of this is Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps, who's the most awarded Olympian ever, had an admitted crisis of identity when he left the swimming pool because he didn't know who he was outside of the pool. And so folks get into trouble when they tie their identity to what they do. If you say, I'm a speaker, but then all of a sudden you lose your voice, or COVID happens and I'm a speaker on stage, there's actually more depth. So your why is universal. So my why is to engage with people in meaningful ways so that we connect with depth and live in a more fulfilled world. I can do that in so many ways. I'm in many respects a little bit unlimited in what I can do to bring that cause to life, which is brilliant. The other is it's balance. It's about balance across the system. So I love that you said your how you do it is just as, if not more important, right? And let's unpack that at an organizational or individual level. If an organization has a great why, but a really unhealthy culture, good luck. If you have a team or an organization that's high in inspiration, but low on trust, that's not going to go well. But if you actually have a team or organizations that's high on trust and lower on inspiration, they'll survive. And in fact, I think a trusting and healthy culture is that fertile soil where purpose can be explored and discovered and developed as well. So it's all three. It's all three of clarity of why, discipline of how you bring that to life, and consistency of what you do, which is everything that Simon speaks about in his book, Start With Why and Find Your Why as well.
You transition that into your own spin on terms of creating a speak up culture. And so I want to give my background why I think this is so critical is we have a definition of culture as being a common language created through shared experience. And so if you think about, you meet your buddies who are part of a fraternity or sorority that you weren't a part of, they have a different language they speak. And the little pieces of language, little phrases mean years of experiences in just a phrase. And so companies that create that have that common language, but it's created through shared experience. And so then there's pieces to it, and there's lots more definitions to it. But I think that you get into that, and the thing that we used to say is I'd walk in and I would first listen. If I wanted to tell you the culture, I would just listen, because I would listen to the quality of conversations. If I hear complaints, if I'm hearing, I can't wait till 5 p.m., if I'm hearing break was too short, I can pretty much sum up the culture based on the quality of conversations. And what we would also then say is the most dreadful day of a leader is when people stop telling the leader the truth. There's a place where leaders that have that culture go. And it's called La La Land. It's where the disconnected leader goes to die, because they're so disconnected. They're like, oh, that's just how they are. Well, he won't listen anyways, or she won't listen anyways. And so there's no connection to what the deeper, broader form of reality is of what other people are feeling. And so we tell leaders, I said, if we're going to do this culture work, we have a course called Engage, and we're going to do this. I said, we're going to, the outcome is something you're not expecting, and it's not going to be measured on your P&L. It's going to be, we're going to increase the level of people being able to speak the truth in your organization. And I go, why? I go, think about it. Well, if you get somebody to speak the truth to you, you get better data. And if you get better data, what can you do? Make better decisions. And if you make better decisions, what happens to the business? You get better results. And I go, but it's going to begin with this very intangible place. And for me to be able to speak up, I have to feel psychologically safe. And now we're back to where we started. And people watch the process unfold. They go, well, that's magic. I said, no, it's actually not. It's very scientific. But most people don't want to understand the purpose of the rationale behind it. And granted, they don't really need to. They just need the result. You now wrote a book on the speak up culture, which has more than just psychological safety in it. which I love. So tell us about the inspiration of the book. Let's dive deep into what you think the most important parts. And if you're listening to this, please go purchase it. I'm going to put it in the show notes. And these are the type of books, by the way, that if you're listening to this, that you need to read because they're applicable to everything that you do. It's not just creating a culture, learning how to create a culture at home, let your kids speak up. And I'll give you this. Imagine your kids not being able to speak up out of fear of retribution. They're not going to tell you when they did something stupid. They're not going to tell you when there's a potential risk because they can't have that. They're scared of you. It's not that you can't be disciplined, but there's a nuance to being okay to speak up that to me applies to every aspect of life. And so that is why I think you need to go get this book. So talk to us about the inspiration. Tell us about what it is and what we need to understand.
Awesome. So you're making me think of my kids now, which is, I just had a conversation last week with a friend who says to his young kids, if you tell me the truth, you won't get in trouble. And I went, no. What I say to my kids, I said, if you tell me the truth, you won't get in more trouble. I can't promise you're not going to get in trouble, which is a piece on, it's psychological safety plus accountability, right? So why I wrote this book, one, I already shared my experience of growing up with a stutter, knowing what it feels like to be voiceless. But here's the amazing thing is you don't need to have a speech impediment to feel voiceless. You can feel voiceless inside of any relationship if it isn't an optimal, healthy, thriving relationship, either with yourself or with others. And being on, working in a near 20-year career now, seeing a myriad of different teams and experiencing a myriad different of teams, much like you, noticing differences of teams, the quality of conversations, the level of, to take from Stephen Colbert, truthiness. How much truthiness is there here, right? What I'm loving about our conversation is we might be using different words to say the same things, but with respect, we go, René, tell me more. What do you mean by that? It's not closed-mindedness. It's open-mindedness and curiosity and genuine curiosity around, tell me what you mean by that. Oh yeah, totally. We're saying the same thing from different ways, unless we're not, which is healthy and okay as well. A speak up culture is an environment in which it feels both psychologically safe and worth it to share ideas, even if they're half baked.
I love the worth it part.
Yes, it's so important. So share ideas, even if they're half-baked. Share feedback to help one another grow. The purpose of feedback is in the first four letters, feed. It's not called knock down back. To share concerns before they become issues, ethical, health, whatever human, concerns. To disagree. A huge part of a speak-up culture is in our ability to disagree and debate well, and to even admit mistake, believing all of that will lead to improvement and not being repeatedly ignored or worse, punished. There, again, it isn't an absence of accountability, but you speak up believing that it's safe and worth it to do so.
Let's just go back to that. I mean, I could just say, do you feel safe enough to disagree with the people at work? Do you feel safe enough to admit when you're wrong, when you've made mistakes? Do you feel safe enough to speak a difficult truth? I mean, those are powerful questions. And even just those three questions, if the answer was no, we know where to begin now. Like, how do we create that? So talk to us about, let's say the answer is no. Let's look at it from two perspectives. You decide which one's first. I want to look at it from the perspective of the leader that feels like, wow, I don't think my people can answer yes to those questions. And then two, I am the one that doesn't feel safe. What do I do now? And so I'll let you choose which the team member to versus the leader.
Let's start top down and then we'll go bottom up. So top down is either through your own sort of instinct and intuition, self-awareness, humility, or there's real hard data through surveys or a facilitator or a coach or something. But you have some sort of meaningful data to say, my people don't feel as safe as they could to speak up, bring their best ideas, offer me feedback, disagree with me, etc. So the places to look are, it's a virtuous cycle between encourage and reward. We must both encourage folks to speak up and then reward them when they do. Encourage means René, I value your voice. I want to hear it. My favorite example of encourage comes from Ben Berman, who's an aviation expert. I believe he still flies for United to this day. And every time he flies, he's the most senior. He has the most influence or clout, typically. And he says the same line to his flight crew every single time, which, by the way, the likelihood in a large commercial airliner that your pilot and co-pilot have flown together is like less than 2%. I've advised them, maybe you should make pods. Like, I'd feel more comfortable knowing that my pilots had relationship prior to 3 minutes ago. That's just me. But Ben Berman says to any flight crew, I've never flown a perfect flight, and today is no exception. I need to know what you see. A wonderful act of encourage, right? Ask open-ended questions, use surveys and polls, use silence. Hey, everyone, I need everyone's ideas to help solve this issue. Zip it. Don't tell the group your idea, senior leader. Zip it. Wait, suspend. That's on the encourage side. The reward is, okay, someone takes the bait. They sort of open up the ropes, the rings to that speak up boxing ring. They step in, they take the risk, and they speak up. How does it go? Are you rewarded for it, or are you repeatedly ignored or worse, punished? Reward doesn't necessarily in the short term mean extrinsic rewards like bonus, pay raise, promotions, statue made in your honor out in front of corporate headquarters. That might come in time. It's more intrinsic. René, thank you. Wow, that must have taken courage to share. I appreciate that risk. Hey, I don't yet see what you're saying. Can you share with me what got you to that conclusion? Share with me or the room. That's still a reward. We didn't implement your idea, but here's why. Keep it coming. You can only use that one so many times until apathy sets in. But these are all versions of reward to say to folks, your speaking up is worth it. The other thing to add in is there's a spectrum. That speaking up is not sucking up, that's hogging air, and speaking up is not a hall pass to be a jerk. And if someone is a jerk, like we say, bring your authentic self to work. If your authentic self is a-hole, you still got to own that. But there might be validity in what's being shared. So we can say the intent or there's value to what you shared, but we have to provide you with feedback or coaching on the behavior and the impact of that behavior.
I love that. It's you're one, the boundaries of saying, it's not free reign to be a jerk. And, in looking at it from this perspective too, saying the encouragement and reward to go. So even as simple as somebody says something and go, guys, that's the kind of difficult questions that we need here. Like, it's super uncomfortable, but he is asking the right kind of question. Good job, John or Mary. And that sort of immediate, and I think the closer to the behavior that we give that reward, obviously from an operant conditioning perspective, is really good. And sometimes the reward is the facial expressions. Like, God, never thought about it that way. Like, man, that was good. Threw me off, but holy, wow, that's the kind of stuff we need here. And it happened immediately. It's like, wow, I did this and I got paid. Like, whoa, okay. I have impact. The more I think people can do that now, the bigger question is, what kind of leader, what kind of human do you need to be able to do that? Is the big question. For me to be able to do that, I have to have let go of my ego. I probably need to be a pretty secure leader in myself. And I need to, and if you're in this is right to the leader. If you feel scared, psychologically unsafe to create and do what he just said, then you have some internal work to do for yourself, for your future, for your family, for your kids, for your team, to figure out why you're so worried about that. And, a lion doesn't need to roar. It just needs to walk into a room. It doesn't need to tell everybody that. And so this is great. I love that. Encourage and reward repeatedly, and to really do that. Okay.
So yeah, that's on the leader side. The only last thing I'd say about the leader side is, as a leader, your whisper is a shout and your tiptoes are stomps. Everyone's listening. Everyone's watching your every move.
Say that again, please. Your whisper, your tiptoes are stomp.
As a leader, your whisper is a shout and your tiptoes are stomps. It's the conversation we had previously on influence, that you have to know that if you are in a formal position of leadership, you have authority. We are biologically wired to offer those with authority with deference, whether you're right or not. And so the other truth as a leader is you need to know that the more senior you get, the more authority you have in a context or culture, the further away you are or you're at risk of being further away from the truth. And you have to work especially hard at encouraging the truth to show up and rewarding it when it does, especially if it's bad news or something hard to hear.
And so that right there, I want to cover those two pieces because that requires massive levels of self-awareness. Chapter 2 of my book, or first chapter might be actually. And the number one skill of a leader is that self-awareness. If they don't have that, like I used to say, pretend you realize you're just patting them on the back with your hand on there, but you have a sledgehammer in your hand. Do you know how, like, if you're not careful, how hard that hits? It is huge. And I love that. Your tiptoes a stomp, your whisper is a shout. Like that is such exactly it. And so there needs to be a sense of temperament and understand your influence, understand that you're being watched, understand that you've lost certain privileges, like being able to just to spout about the mouth. You can't. You're more watched now. People are listening to you now. And welcome to the burden of leadership. Well, then don't be a leader. Cool. Or embrace and be a good steward of the attention that you're getting now. That's huge. One of the things that I would just add to this, and this is so good. I hope you guys are taking notes. I already got 2 pages. What we would say is that trust is an interesting thing. So it's, and trust is not all encompassing, because I know people that can, don't worry, you can trust me. Well, I know people that I can trust to watch my kids, but I would never trust them to be on time. And I know people that I trust to be on time, but I'd never trust them with my kids. And so doing a trust fall in the middle of the forest doesn't mean I can now speak the truth to you. All it means that in that scenario, if I fall backwards in the woods and we're under this guise in this frame of this workshop, you'll be there to catch me. The only way to build trust around speaking the truth or speaking up is through doing it and showing that it's there. And so a lot of our workshops have this apex moment of where we're sitting face to face in front of people and going through the process through a structured dialogue with 4 steps on it. People say, well, why do you have to be structured? I said, well, because safety requires structure, order, predictability. And by you reading these cards, you're engaging a higher level of the brain, because the lower parts of our brain can't read. So you're forcing a neural connection by reading, even though you have it memorized. Read it anyways. It calms that part of the brain down. But in doing it, like you said, like once somebody speaks up, that should be a sacred moment, even if you're upset, to reward that, because the last thing you want is an obedient organization. They act when you say, but if you don't say, they're not acting.
Bingo. Yep, and you get no discretionary effort. But yes, let's talk the other side. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I work in an organization. I don't feel safe. What do I do?
So I think the first question you need to explore, and I suggest that you explore this with others and likely professionals, therapist, coach, counselor, someone who can bring you objective and honest perspective, is, do you feel safe with yourself? How much of this is your own self-awareness and self-development versus how much of it is objectively, this is psychologically dangerous? And so what's our previous relationship with authority? What's the sort of psychological safety backpack that I bring here? And do as much as you can an objective analysis on, is it psychologically dangerous, or do I not feel safe with myself? And if it's more on the latter, that I don't feel safe with myself, there's more personal work. If you go deeper and you're like, no, I feel pretty good, and I don't feel that there's a level of trust, then is it worth taking a modest, reasonable test? As I'm not saying speak up about the biggest thing, but pick something and try it and dip your toe in the water and see how it goes. And are you rewarded? Does it feel safe? Does it feel worth it? Like, the only way you can test a hypothesis is if you try something. Another is seek counsel with others who have been in this culture. Hey, do you speak up around here? Or how do you go to the boss around this, that, or the other issue? But take a modest, reasonable test if it feels like it's worth it to do so. And after those 2, I would then say, all right, is this a place where you feel that you can thrive? And if not, go find a place where you feel that you can thrive. You and I think, should never be in the position to tell someone you should quit your job. We don't know what their context is, but I think it's okay to say, hey, let's help you find a leader, team, organization where you feel that it can be safe and worth it for you to play and contribute to your purpose.
I love those questions around the first approach is to look internal. I think that is so wise. And not what you hear often. And it's also not what people want to hear. Like they want to hear, yeah, this sounds like a job. The boss is a jerk. Hold on a second. What tell me about you? Do you feel safe even with yourself? Like, let's say that he is, but how about you? And that journey isn't a fun one. And getting that help, but I think that is so critical to go that route first. What I'll add to that, and here's some thoughts, and I'd love to get your take on this. So okay, so you work for an organization, you don't feel like you can be safe. I said, well, what about the concept of be the leader that you need? So you may not have title, but what if your job was to create safety for your leader? What if that was a job? And so imagine this conversation, going to the leader saying, hey, let's say, Shed, you're my leader, saying, Shed, one, I want to be really clear of the purpose of this conversation. I want to be ridiculously successful for you. I want you to look at our relationship and say, René is hitting the mark on all areas. And so I say that as a preface. So there's the frame and also a statement to honor that person. I have enjoyed working for you. I think I can learn a ton from you. And if, as long as you come from an authentic, ask yourself, what are things that you really enjoy there? Now, if you can't, we'll talk about that in a minute. So I have a question on how maybe you can coach me on how best to do this. My assumption, Shed, is that there's times where you've hired me not always to just agree, but to help maybe see things that maybe from a different perspective. Do you agree with that? And is that what you want from me? And most often they'll say yes. I say, great. When, let's say that I disagree or I see a different route, what is the best way that you would love for me to approach that? Is it, do you want me to do it in the meeting, real time? Do you want me to do it outside of the meeting? Is there a certain language? Like how do you want me to do it? And there are times maybe you want me just to buy in. Like, how can I be successful in that arena with you? And not letting them set the parameters, which create structure, order, predictability for the person that needs to feel safe. Because I think a lot of people think, well, people need to create safety for me. Well, what if I can't? They're not going to. The person, well, they come by and they got to motivate me. Well, what if they never show up? How do I then fix my environment and say, okay, they're not going to create it for me, so I'm going to create it for them. And would you agree that if you got really good at that, pretty soon you won't have the same job? Whether there or someone else, you're going to be leading people very soon. Would you agree with all that?
I would. I totally would. And I think you need to ask yourself, do you want to lead people? It's not a job for everyone, and it's not a job for everyone at certain moments in life. But I think there are a few things when I think of leadership. I think you described me in the opening. You said the word humble or humility, which I take so close to heart, because I think the most attractive leadership attribute is humility, which is a modest and accurate, reasonable, realistic view of oneself. Also noting that you have everything, or you have stake in your success. You also have stake in your mishaps and stake in your failure. You have something to do with things that don't go your way, right? So yeah, I love that, René. I think that's brilliant. And we have a leadership issue in the world. We have too many folks that are put into positions and they either don't want to be there or aren't equipped tactically or adaptively with the right skills and attributes to do the job to the best of their ability. We have a lot of insecure leaders, and an insecure leader is a dangerous one. So I love what can you do with your own agency to say, leader, frame, this is what I'm going for. This is what I'm trying to do. This is what I need from you, or what do you need from me to achieve this? I think that's great.
I love that when you realize just the danger of an insecure leader. It is so toxic. It is so cancerous. And whether they like it or not, even Harvard proved it, their leaders are the most watched, the most listened to. And if you've got somebody who's insecure, you're going to spread that like a virus. And it happens in sales organizations. If you have sales call reluctance at a leadership level, they will adopt those same sales reluctant activities within 6 weeks. You've got things from an attitude perspective that are just spread like a virus. There's an old book called Red Ink Behaviors. There's a self-published book, and probably can't find it anywhere. I've got like 3 copies of it because we bought a bunch of them. I'm talking about 30 years ago. It talked about how within 15 minutes of a 1,000-person organization, one outbreak at the board level or leadership team spreads in 15 minutes throughout the entire organization. Like red ink, because it's expensive behavior. And so behaviors that are that way. And so I love that. And these are questions. If you're a leader, I want you to ask these questions. And to look in the mirror and say, am I that insecure leader? And only you know how to do that. conversation. It would require you to set your ego aside for a minute. So do it privately, do it by yourself, get feedback from people that you trust. But if you work for an insecure leader, then okay, so you could be like, I work at my boss sucks, or like that. Or what if you took it as a challenge to say, okay, so if he's insecure, how can I create more security for my leader? And one, there's a self-survival component to this. So it is self-serving because the more secure the leader is there. And I'll tell you this, if you have an insecure leader, but you make them feel secure, you become very important to that leader. Very important. So there's a political side to this as well. But you understanding the game part of this, what you have to do though is really let go of that. Understand the potential of it, but you have to let go. That's where the virtuous side of this comes in. You have the choice of manipulation or influence, but you're going to let go of the manipulative side and choose into the authentic. How can I create a better space for everyone to thrive here? I may not be the stated leader, but it doesn't mean I can't lead. This is fantastic.
Can I add on a couple things here?
Please.
You hit it perfectly, which is a couple of the attributes of leaders are authenticity and consistency. So, and I think part of authenticity is consistency, that I consistently experience you as you. So one myth, again, is we believe that leaders need to be warm and charismatic. Nope, they don't need to be warm or charismatic. My favorite leader ever was consistently cold and grumpy, but I knew that she had my back, and I knew that she would give me the feedback to help me grow, and I knew she cared for me, right? I was once part of a team where the most senior leader would only sometimes, very seldomly, but sometimes would yell at and berate other members of the team. That isn't a spectrum, it's binary. That if you witness a leader just once do something like that, you're just waiting for the next time for it to happen. That talk about that reptilian brain, there's always a little bit of cortisol waiting. And so for anyone who's in a formal role of leadership, it's a high stakes role. We know from the National Institute of Health and UKG that our relationship with our leader has more of an impact on our health and well-being than that of our relationship with our family doctor. And it's at par with our relationship with our life partner if we have one of those. The relationship we have with our boss impacts our health and well-being. Leadership in and of itself is a life-feeding or life-depleting line of work. It is vital.
I'm writing that down. I want you to hear this, folks. Your relationship with your leader is more impactful, more determinant on your health and wellness than your relationship with your primary doctor. That is, so basically what that means is that being a good leader is good medicine. It's good healing. You're literally healing the world and healing people by being a good leader. And to be a good leader, they have to feel safe with you.
Yes. And I think it goes all the way back to the opening of this conversation, which was the employment contract used to be longevity. It isn't anymore. And while I wish it could, it's just not the reality of the world that we live in with capitalism and markets and the way things go. But what I think the promise of employment should be now, and it isn't, but I think it should be, is that of growth. René, I can't guarantee that you're going to be here for 35 years, but I promise you, or my commitment to you, is the amount of time that you will be here, you will grow as a human being. And even better are leaders who take it as their responsibility to help the people around them grow. Sign me up for that.
Yeah. That keeps such an honest relationship. Am I helping them grow still? No, they're outgrowing me. Shit, I better raise my game as a leader.
Or tell them, let's find you another place where you can grow and flourish because it's no longer here. And that's okay. And that's okay.
I was talking to somebody who was really frustrated and sad and heard that one of their top person, they're almost like their sidekick partner, left somewhere else. And I said, well, welcome to the challenge of working with really good talent. When they have big wings, who are we to step in the way of that? I go, the way you respond to this will be the brand of your leadership. If you get frustrated and bitter and try to hold them back and shame and guilt them, you'll be remembered for that. Or if you go back and you say, I'm not surprised, you have big wings. I'm sad, scared that you're leaving us because we love working with you. The door is always open. What do you need from us? And can you at least just make sure you don't leave us hanging? You'll be also remembered forever.
Yeah. and they will refer friends, and you can still breed loyalty even if it's not with them in that role.
Absolutely. And again, what there's a great concept that Jim Rohn said. He said, set a goal to be a millionaire, not for the money, but for what it forces you to become to be the millionaire. So set a goal to be that kind of leader, not so that you can be that leader, but who do you have to become in order to have that conversation authentically? What has to be healed inside? I said the same to both my kids. I said, your goal is to be the most dependable person at my funeral in the room. Why? Not because you want me to die, but who do you have to become to be that dependable? Do you have to have your money in order? You have to have your relationships in order. You have to have things so that people can look at you and say, okay, I can depend on Alex, Diego, whoever it is. And it's the goal that forces you to become. So the goal that forces you into a really good how. To go back to that piece. I am looking at our time, and I thought we had 20 minutes pass by, but we're already at an hour, which is fantastic, which says that we're probably going to have to do this again. Yeah, this has been fantastic. Well, first and foremost, how can people get a hold of you? I'll make sure I put it in the show notes, but if they're listening here, thank you. How can they get a hold of you?
I'm pretty sure, René, I'm the only Stephen Shedletzky in the entire human race for the time being. So all of you small handfuls of Shedletzkys, please name your children wisely. So if you Google me, you will find me. I'm most active on LinkedIn and website shedinspires.com or speakupculture.com.
I love that. I love that. So please go buy his book. Get him on LinkedIn. I did see you were like 78,000 followers on LinkedIn. So you are doing that right, my friend. That's fantastic. But this was great. I literally now have 3 pages of notes here of things that we talked about. This was insightful, refreshing, all the things. What's any final words you want to tell people?
1, thank you, Suzanne Donaldson, for introducing us. And 2, René, it's been a joy. You said it halfway through that we might come from different perspectives or say things in different ways, but we're saying the same thing. I love your emphasis that leadership is about influence. We didn't even talk about the culture equation, which we will next time. Yeah, but it's all around your level of influence has an impact, a disproportionate impact in whatever context or culture you're in. So just a treat to join you and look forward to the next.
Well, I'm excited for this audience to get to know you. And again, if you like this, please subscribe, like, share, all of the wonderful things, and help us spread the word on what it really means and how to become better leaders. And more importantly, whatever you got to do, learn to speak up. And if you're a leader, create that culture that can speak up. Thank you so much, Shed. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you for sharing this time with us. If the experience resonated with you, follow us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or amplifymylife.com. Share it with anyone else who's ready to amplify their lives. And remember to let our hearts speak in sequence. For more from René Rodriguez, visit meetrene.com.